Story 1. It was a cold autumn evening when Daniel Carter first stepped into his new home. The house, an old Victorian-style mansion, stood at the edge of town, abandoned for years. Its eerie silence was occasionally interrupted by the rustling of the dry, golden leaves outside. Daniel had always been fascinated by old houses. When he stumbled upon this property at an unbelievably low price, he couldn't resist. The real estate agent, an old woman with sunken eyes, had warned him. "This house has a history. People say it's haunted." But Daniel wasn't the kind to believe in such superstitions. He had laughed it off and signed the deal. The first few nights were peaceful. Daniel enjoyed exploring the grand halls, admiring the intricate woodwork and ancient chandeliers. But as the days passed, strange things began to happen. It started with whispers in the dead of night. Faint, barely audible murmurs that seemed to come from the walls themselves. One evening, as Daniel was preparing dinner, he heard a soft tapping noise. He turned, expecting to see something logical, perhaps a window left ajar, but there was nothing. The sound grew louder, moving from one room to another, as if someone were knocking inside the walls. A chill ran down his spine. He decided to ignore it, attributing it to old pipes or the wind. But the occurrences escalated. Objects moved on their own. The rocking chair in his study swayed despite the still air. The chandelier above the dining table trembled, as though unseen hands were brushing against it. And then there was the shadow, a dark, formless figure that he glimpsed in the mirrors, but never in reality. One night, Daniel woke to a suffocating presence in his bedroom. It was as if the air itself had thickened, pressing down on him. He could hear whispering, closer this time, urgent and angry. He sat up, his body drenched in sweat. His heart pounded as he saw a faint outline standing at the foot of his bed. It was tall, unnaturally thin, with hollow eyes that bored into him. Paralyzed with fear, Daniel forced himself to move, reaching for the bedside lamp. The moment light flooded the room, the figure was gone. But the air remained heavy, oppressive. He barely slept that night. Determined to understand what was happening, Daniel visited the local library the next morning. He scoured the archives, and soon discovered the house's dark past. In the late 1800s, it had belonged to a man named Thomas Hensley, a recluse accused of practicing dark rituals. Townsfolk spoke of disappearances, visitors who entered the house, but were never seen again. Eventually, Hensley himself vanished without a trace. Daniel's skin prickled. He hurried home, intending to pack his bags and leave. But as he entered the house, the door slammed shut behind him with a force that rattled the entire structure. The whispers returned, growing into an eerie chorus. The air turned frigid, his breath visible in the dim light. A sharp, painful pressure gripped his chest, forcing him to his knees. He gasped, clawing at his throat, but there was no visible force strangling him. Shadows coiled around him, their whispers intensifying into an inhuman shriek. He tried to scream, to fight, but his body refused to obey. The darkness enveloped him, consuming him entirely. Days later, the townsfolk noticed Daniel had gone missing. The police broke into the house, only to find him lying motionless in the hallway, eyes wide open in terror. The coroner found no cause of death. His body was untouched, yet his face was frozen in an expression of unimaginable horror. The house remained silent once more, waiting for its next occupant. Story 2. The house stood at the edge of town, abandoned for decades. Its tall, rusted gates creaked eerily in the wind, and its once glorious architecture had crumbled into a sinister ruin. Yet, when Michael Thompson saw the house listed at an incredibly low price, he couldn't resist. A fresh start, a new beginning, That's all he wanted. The moment he stepped into the house, a shiver ran down his spine. The air was heavy, and an inexplicable coldness gripped his chest. The realtor, a frail old man with a nervous twitch, handed him the keys without a word and quickly walked away. Michael ignored his unease and moved in. The first few nights were quiet. He spent his time setting up his furniture and making the house livable. But on the fifth night, everything changed. It started with whispers. Faint, almost indistinct, like wind slipping through cracks, yet undeniably human. The whispers slithered through the walls, growing louder each night. At first, he dismissed them as his imagination, but soon, he began hearing his name being called in a raspy, guttural voice. "Michael!" The voice set icy fingers crawling down his spine. He searched the house, checking every room, every shadowed corner, but he found nothing. Then came the knocks, loud, erratic pounding at his bedroom door, yet when he opened it, the hallway was empty. One night, as he lay in bed, paralyzed with fear, he felt something crawl onto the bed. A cold breath brushed against his ear, and a chilling whisper rasped. "Get out!" He screamed, bolting upright, his heart hammering. He turned on every light in the house, but the moment he did, an ear-splitting shriek erupted from the walls, shaking the very foundation of the house. That was the final straw. Desperate, he sought help. He approached a group of priests from a nearby monastery, their leader being Father Damien, a man renowned for his expertise in exorcisms. When Michael explained his torment, the priests exchanged grim glances and agreed to visit his house. As soon as they stepped inside, a suffocating darkness engulfed them. Father Damien's face hardened. "There is a great evil here," he murmured. The priests began their ritual, chanting holy verses as they spread blessed salt and holy water throughout the house. The moment they reached the basement, an unnatural wind howled through the halls, and the temperature dropped below freezing. A putrid stench filled the air. Then the shadows moved. 3 horrific figures emerged from the darkness, twisted, contorted creatures with hollow, glowing eyes and gaping mouths filled with rotting teeth. Their voices layered over each other in an otherworldly cacophony, shrieking, cursing, mocking. Father Damien held up his cross. "In the name of God, I command you to leave this place." The spirits wailed, their forms twisting violently. Objects flew across the room, slamming into walls. One of the younger priests was hurled across the basement, crashing into the floor with a painful cry. The battle raged on. The priests continued chanting, their prayers growing louder, overpowering the ghastly screams. One of the spirits lunged at Michael, its skeletal fingers reaching for his throat, but Father Damien threw a vial of holy water at it. The ghost shrieked as its form disintegrated into black smoke. The other 2 spirits shrieked in rage, their forms shifting and flickering as if caught in an invisible fire. The priests pressed on, their voices unwavering. With one final, deafening scream, the remaining spirits burst into nothingness, leaving behind an unsettling silence. The house groaned, as if exhaling a final breath. The darkness lifted, and warmth seeped back into the walls. The nightmare was over. Michael, trembling and exhausted, looked at Father Damien with gratitude. "Thank you." The priest placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "They were trapped here for too long, feeding on fear. Now they're gone." Michael sold the house shortly after, never looking back. The new owners never reported any disturbances. But on certain nights, if one listened closely, the wind still carried faint whispers, memories of the horrors that once lurked within. And in the deepest shadows, something still watched, waiting. Story 3. James Carter had always wanted a peaceful home away from the chaos of city life. When he found a charming old house on the outskirts of town, he immediately fell in love with it. The price was surprisingly low, but the real estate agent assured him it was only because the house had been vacant for years. Excited to start anew, James moved in without a second thought. The first night was eerily quiet, apart from the occasional creaks of the wooden floorboards. But as the days passed, James began to hear something unsettling, a distant, whispering voice echoing from the basement. At first, he dismissed it as his imagination, the house settling, or the wind seeping through the cracks. But the whispering persisted, growing louder each night, morphing into guttural groans and unearthly wails. Determined to uncover the source, James grabbed a flashlight and cautiously made his way down the basement stairs. The air was damp and heavy, carrying an overwhelming stench of decay. His light flickered against the barren stone walls, casting long, menacing shadows. Yet, despite the unshakable feeling of being watched, there was nothing there. Just emptiness. The strange occurrences escalated. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed shut, and the temperature in the house plummeted during the night. Sleep became a distant memory, and James found himself consumed by exhaustion and dread. Desperate for answers, he reached out to Father Donovan, a priest known for his experience in dealing with paranormal disturbances. Father Donovan arrived the next evening, his face lined with wisdom and concern. After listening to James's experiences, he nodded solemnly. "There is something malevolent beneath your house, James. Something unnatural." James's skin prickled with fear. "But I've checked the basement. There's nothing there." The priest placed a hand on his shoulder. "Not in the basement, James. Beneath it." A chill ran down his spine. The priest instructed James to retrieve a shovel. Together, they began to dig into the cold, damp floor of the basement. As the minutes dragged into hours, the sound of metal striking something solid sent a jolt of terror through James. With trembling hands, he cleared away the dirt, revealing what lay beneath. A grotesque, decayed body twisted in an unnatural position, its face frozen in an eternal scream. But it was no ordinary corpse. The flesh was unnervingly intact despite the evident passage of time. Dark, charred veins ran along its limbs, and its hollow eyes seemed to pulse with an ominous glow. James recoiled, bile rising in his throat. Father Donovan murmured a prayer, drawing out a vial of holy water and a crucifix. "This soul was not laid to rest. It has become something else. We must send it back." The air grew thick with an oppressive force. The body twitched, its jaw creaking open as a guttural voice gurgled from within. The walls trembled, and an icy wind howled through the basement as the thing clawed at the ground, trying to rise. Father Donovan wasted no time. He began chanting in Latin, his voice firm and unwavering despite the chaos erupting around him. The body convulsed violently, its limbs snapping at unnatural angles. A horrific scream pierced the air, causing James to stumble back, clutching his ears. Darkness coiled around them like living tendrils. The priest continued his exorcism, his voice rising in defiance. The body writhed, its flesh splitting as something monstrous attempted to emerge. James watched in horror as a shadowy entity, its form shifting and writhing, clawed its way out of the decayed remains. Summoning every ounce of courage, Father Donovan threw the holy water onto the entity. It shrieked, a sound so inhuman that it sent shivers down James's spine. The darkness recoiled, writhing as the priest pressed the crucifix against the body. Flames erupted from the corpse, consuming it in an ethereal fire. The entity let out one final, bone-chilling wail before vanishing into the abyss. The silence that followed was deafening. James collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. The oppressive weight that had loomed over the house for weeks was suddenly lifted. Father Donovan helped him up. "It's over now. Whatever it was, it's been banished. But this house, It holds many secrets. Be careful, James." Though shaken, James felt a sense of relief wash over him. He filled the hole, covering up the remnants of the past. That night, for the first time since moving in, he slept peacefully. Yet, as dawn approached, a soft whisper curled through the basement floor. "I'm not finished yet."